This is chapter 6 of The Night Singer. 6. Hannah pushed open the door to the bakery in Farshden and only just managed to swallow the greeting on the tip of her tongue. The man deliberating over the bread inside wasn't Ove at all. His haircut and denim jacket had tricked her. She peered out through the window but couldn't see her superior outside. Should she buy something now or should she wait? She didn't know whether she was supposed to pay for herself. The man she had mistaken for Ove paid for his 4 walnut rolls and left. The young girl behind the counter turned to Hannah, who took a step forward and ordered a coffee and a cheese sandwich. Her breakfast this morning had consisted of coffee and half a bowl of cornflakes, so she was hungry. The handful of tables inside the bakery were empty, but Hannah chose to head out to the larger seating area outside. She knew she would find it easier to talk if she didn't have to worry about being overheard. There were fleece blankets draped over the backs of the chairs, but Hannah ignored them. The sky was clearer here than it had been in Mockelmosen, and it had to be at least 15 degrees Celsius. Eric was driving the 2 German tourists back to the guest house in their own car. They had both been too shaken up to get behind the wheel themselves. Finding a dead boy was hardly on their holiday itinerary. The plan was for Eric to take their statements at the guest house. Hannah would pick him up after her meeting with Ove. A group of teenagers walked by, heading toward the harbor. They were laughing, and the lone girl swung a punch in the air after one of the boys. Hannah wondered whether she should have sat inside after all, and was just about to get up when she saw Ove pull into the parking lot on the other side of the road. He climbed out and raised his hand in greeting. Nerves made Hannah's cheeks flush. After buying a tea and an almond tart with sliced strawberries on top, Ove came out and sat down opposite her. He had upgraded the denim jacket he wore 16 years ago and was wearing a black leather jacket. Hannah began by giving him an update on what they had found out in Mockelmosen, and Ove took a large bite of his tart as he listened. Crumbs of short crust pastry fell to his lap and he brushed them away. "I know you're doing a great job," he said. "I really just wanted to make sure you were okay with being thrown straight in at the deep end like this. To be perfectly honest, I feel a certain amount of responsibility for you." "Why?" "Because I hired you, and, well, because of what happened with your dad. I'm the one who sent him to prison, after all." Hannah stared down at her sandwich, at the glossy slice of cheese. She took a sip of her coffee instead. Part of her wanted to ask whether Ove had ever had any doubts, but she didn't dare. Instead, she said that the only person responsible for her father's prison sentence was her father. Ove seemed noticeably relieved, like he really had been convinced that she blamed him. "I don't have much to say about the job itself," he continued. "You know what's what, and you'll work out how we do things around here soon enough. But don't hesitate to talk to me if you need to, about anything." "Okay." Hannah heard how lame her response sounded, but Ove's concern bothered her. She wasn't used to it. "Do you have much contact with your brother these days?" he asked. "No, not really. He lives in London now." As though his choice of city were the reason she and Christopher had drifted apart. Ove had interviewed Christopher back then too, more times than he'd interviewed Hannah, in fact, since Christopher hadn't been as willing to play ball. Ove fixed his eyes on her, only letting her go when she forced herself to meet his gaze. He reached for his bag and pulled out a mobile phone, which he pushed over to Hannah along with a security pass and a sheet of paper. "Here's your pass, your phone, and your login details. Make sure you change your password." "Absolutely," Hannah told him. It was a more enthusiastic choice of word than okay at the very least. "And my gun?" "We can sort that out this afternoon." Ove took a sip of his tea. "We've identified the victim," he continued. "He had a bank card and a library card on him. Belonged to Joel Forslund, 15. We checked his latest ID photo, and it's definitely him. He's from Gardby." He was giving her that look again, searching. "Is that going to be a problem?" Hannah shook her head. That was all she could manage. She realized this must be why Ove had wanted to meet. Forland wasn't a name she recognized, but it was her first day on the job, and she was already being asked to return to Gardby. As she had locked the door to her childhood home there last autumn, handing the key to the real estate agent, she had thought she was finished with the place. "Joe Forland has been dead for a few hours at least by the time he was found. The doctor who visited the scene said that rigor mortis had already set in." Hannah remembered the technician having to pry the boy's fingers open, but all she could hear was Christopher's voice. "You're crazy. You're going to ruin everything." Ove took out another sheet of paper. Here's all the information about his mother. That's who he lived with, plus a younger sister and a stepfather. I want you and Eric to go over there and break the news, if possible. Also interview her. It was only once Hannah was back in the car that she looked down at the information Ove had given her about Joel Forslund's mother. It consisted of an address and a copy of her driver's license. She stared down at the photo. At the woman's dark brown hair, it only came down to her shoulders now, rather than her waist. At her eyes and a small upturned nose, both exactly the same as they had been 16 years ago. Everything around Hannah seemed to disappear, and it felt as though the ground had opened up and swallowed both her and the car. Rebecca.